Thank you so much, Shannon. I appreciate it. Welcome to our 2024 NOAA Fisheries EBM, EBFM seminar series. Today we continue the series that's been running for some time, since November 2017. And our main focus is to increase awareness about ecosystem-based fisheries management and highlight the progress that NOAA and our partners are making with respect to enhancing EBM strategies. I want to take a moment to really thank Shannon. She's been a wonderful partner in this effort, and she will be moving on to greener pastures after this presentation. So I really want to extend my appreciation and thanks to Shannon for all her efforts. The NOAA Library staff continues to be a valuable partner in this endeavor, and our seminars are every second Wednesday of the month from 3 to 4 Eastern Time. Each presentation is publicly accessible and recorded and archived, so you can see that in the chat. You'll probably see a link to our past recordings. Following today's presentation from Cody, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our speakers, and also there'll be an opportunity to follow up more directly if you'd like. Cody will provide contact information. So many thanks to all our speakers, the colleagues and attendees, and folks that recommend many of the speakers that we have for this season. I also want to draw attention that we do have a speaker for next month. That will be on May 8th, and that is one of our colleagues at NOAA Fisheries, Yvonne Duranier, who's from our West Coast Regional Office, and will be providing us an update on NOAA Fisheries' revised EBFM policy and the roadmap that the agency will be undertaking to advance EBM and EBFM in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Cody Szuwalski, who is from our Alaska Fishery Science Center, and he will be talking about the collapse of the eastern Bering Sea snow crab, the drivers, the management response, and the rising challenges. So Cody, many thanks for your efforts in joining us today, and I appreciate you taking the time. I'll turn this right over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Peg, and thanks to everybody at the library as well. This is a great opportunity to be able to talk about some topics near and dear to my heart. So it'll be focused mainly around crab in Alaska. First, a little bit of my background is I am at the Alaska Fishery Science Center, where I'm a research biologist. I sit on the crab plan team, which is the first level of peer review for science that goes into the management process. I also write stock assessments for snow crab and a red king crab stock in the Bering Sea. And I am a part of the Alaska Climate Linked Modeling Project, which is a group of scientists that from many different backgrounds, from economists to ecologists to climatologists, that are trying to understand what the future might look like for the Bering Sea ecosystem and how management might respond to it. So today I'm hoping to break the talk into three big categories. I'd like to introduce you first to Bering Sea crab fisheries and orient you there a bit. Then move to the collapse of snow crab. Snow crab is one of the largest fisheries for crab in the Bering Sea. And then talk a little bit about how our fisheries management system is responding to the changing environment. All right, so here's Alaska in the green. The Bering Sea shelf is here in the light blue. We've got 5 species of crab and 10 stocks. We have 1 big stock of snow crab, 1 big stock for tanner crab, 2 stocks of blue king crab, 2 stocks of golden king crab, and 4 of red king crab. And this Bristol Bay fishery here is the big one for red king crab. These fisheries are really iconic in the culture of Alaska. I mean, they're known there and beyond. I imagine a good chunk of you have heard of Deadliest Catch, which is a show that's been on for 20 years chronicling these fisheries, and 2 to 5 million people watch this show weekly. So it's really a cultural iconic fishery in the area. I'm going to throw up just a couple of videos here to show you what it looks like to fish crab in the Bering Sea. The conditions are rough, and it is the deadliest catch for a reason. historically, one of the biggest things that has happened in the last few decades in the crab fisheries is the rationalization of the fisheries. And that's the movement from a derby race to fish type of scenario where they went out in all sorts of weather because they had to race to get the crab, to one that's based on quota systems. So they can go and fish whenever they want to catch their quota. This has actually made the fishery much safer and more efficient. And what you're seeing here is how they actually catch the crab. They've got big pots, they drop them on the seafloor, they soak them for a while, pull them up, and put the crab live into their hold. So in addition to being a cultural phenomenon, it's also an important economic driver in the area. These are the time series of catch of the different crab species that we have in the area. And the big ones that'll pop out here are the purple, which are snow crab, the pink, which is tanner crab, and then the green, which is Bristol Bay red king crab. When you put this in the context of just the volume of seafood that comes out of the Bering Sea, crab is relatively small. So it's this orange line here just above walleye pollock, which is this lighter blue color that is your filet of fish sandwich and at McDonald's, and Pacific cod and salmon in the pink color and purple colors respectively. But when you look at the value, the ex-vessel revenue value of those different groups of species, crab becomes a much larger contributor to the overall picture. So given the cultural significance, the economic importance, and the ecological importance, this is a fishery that we spend a lot of time and effort managing. And one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Spinrad, our Undersecretary of Oceans and Atmosphere, is that NOAA is the nation's environmental intelligence agency. And I think this probably makes me as a fish biologist feel a little cooler than I have any right to feel. But when you think about the similarities of the sorts of things that we do, perhaps there is some link to be made. On a yearly basis, we collect data that have varying degrees of uncertainty associated with them. And then we bring them together and try to synthesize those data sets to build a coherent explanation of natural phenomena. And then we use that explanation to try to make some time-sensitive decisions that impact the lives of people around the nation, like how much it's okay to catch of snow crab in any given year. So just in that spirit, I want to talk a little bit about our yearly management cycle and how this actually unfolds. It starts with the Eastern Bering Sea Summer Scientific Survey that's been going on in its present form since the 70s, almost its present form since the 70s. And this is really the cornerstone of our management process. It's likely the most important thing that our science center does, in my opinion. If we don't have the data, there's not much to say. This figure on the left shows the data for snow crab in 2021, where each of these squares is a trawl, and then the color represents the density. There are also trawl stations in the inshore here, but we don't find any snow crab there. It runs from June to August. We go out, we speciate the catch, we count it, weigh it, check for maturity. There are interesting special projects going on every year. And again, it's just really the keystone of our management process. And I got to go out last year, so I'm going to share some pictures. I feel like that's a obligatory thing to do. This is the vessel I was on. This is what the deck looked like. This is a trawl coming up out of the Bering Sea. There are two ladders placed on the deck here, and they're dropping the catch in between the space there. We will jump in shortly and start sorting that and weighing it and sexing it. And some of those catches look something like this when you get up close to them. These are particularly crab heavy. Sometimes it's just all pollock, but you can see the little snow crab in here on the left and the big red king crab over here. Once we pull out the crab, we line them up. We take a subsample of them. We line them up. We measure them. We check for disease. We check if, and these down here at the bottom are diseased critter. The air conditioning just kicked on, so I hope that you guys can still hear okay. If not, it'll be off shortly. And between now and then, just pretend like you're on the beach learning and looking at crab. Um, so we spend time measuring them, weighing them, and these are the data that go into our assessments. We also pull the stomachs out of predators like this Pacific cod on the left, so we can know what's eating what. And last year we put satellite tags on some big red king crab and re-released them so we can see where they go when the survey is not around. Once the survey happens, the stock assessment scientists get those data, and they put them into their assessments, and then they're presented to the crab plan team in September. We select a model that will set the overfishing level, and then that is passed on to the Science and Statistical Committee, which then does another review of the science to make sure that it's all based on the best available science. And from there, the state takes over and sets quotas. The crab fisheries begin in the late fall, early winter. We have another meeting in January to talk about all of the things that we wish we knew, but we don't know, or ways that we can improve the models. And then we try to present some of those improvements in May. And ultimately, the cycle starts all over again in July. So given this is an EBFM seminar, I thought I might talk about some of the special aspects of crab fisheries in Alaska with respect to EBFM. And this is thanks in large part to Gordon Cruz, who put together a manuscript recently looking at just this thing that he invited me to be a co-author on. And one of the big things, perhaps the biggest, is the inclusion of a sloped harvest control rule here. So this figure on the right, the y-axis is essentially the harvest rate, and the x-axis is the amount of biomass in the water. And this line dictates how hard we harvest the stock given its biomass. And the important thing here is this kink. Beneath a certain point, we ratchet down the harvest rates. This is a good check for things like the recent collapse of snow crab. But we also have pay attention to things like fishery and bycatch interactions. So we have an area where there's a bycatch limitation zone for snow crab, and if there is if the bycatch in other fisheries, aside from crab fisheries, exceeds a certain level, there are management measures that kick into place in this area. We also have spatial closures that are closed to certain types of deer, of gear, like troll gear, the Pribilof Islands Habitat Conservation Area and the Bristol Bay Closure Area being two of those. But I think one of the big things that came from the paper is that in spite of these numerous, and this is an incomplete list of the sorts of EBFM measures that are implemented. In spite of these numerous measures, we have 3 of 10 stocks that are now overfished for our crab fisheries. Snow crab fishery, so these lines over here are the status of the stock in terms of biomass over time. The dashed black line is the target biomass, and then beneath this dashed red line, the stock is declared overfished. So blue king crab in this upper left panel, both of those stocks are overfished, and so is snow crab down here. And our Bristol Bay red king crab is dangerously close to that line. So that really shifts me into thinking about the next portion of the talk, and that's talking through the collapse of eastern Bering Sea snow crab. I'm going to take off my secret agent cap and put on my detective cap because I'm trying to collect clues about what happened that I didn't directly observe. And it gives me a chance to revisit one of my favorite books from grad school, The Ecological Detective, and put up a goofy picture of me with pipe in mouth. But the backdrop of the story is that so on the left here is a time series of abundance of snow crab in the eastern Bering Sea from our trawl surveys. And in 2018, there were more snow crab than we had ever seen in the Bering Sea ever in this time series. And in 2021, there were fewer. Snow crab, as you may have guessed from their name, like the cold. So they're generally associated with the cold pool, which is a mass of cold water on the seafloor that is left behind after the ice melts each year. And this dark blue line here is the ice extent, which was conspicuously low in 2018 and 2019, which is the period over which the collapse began. And the resulting cold pools were, in 2018, there was barely a cold pool at all. We'd never seen such a small cold pool. In 2019, it wasn't much better. So the management response to this collapse was declaring the fishery overfished. And I should note that overfished just refers to the biomass declining beneath a certain biomass target or biomass threshold, really. It wasn't fishing was not the driver of this collapse, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The fishery was closed in 2022, and we have a rebuilding plan underway. And to just try and, describe the enormity of the situation to the communities that are dependent upon these resources, this was almost $250 million in ex-vessel revenue in 2020, and that went to zero in 2022. So it's a fishery disaster. This is impacting the lives of many people and communities along the West Coast and in Alaska. And this wasn't just an Alaska-focused event. People around the world were taking note. This was on the front page of CNN one day, which was a surprise to me. And I got texts from Japan and the Netherlands and Canada saying that they were seeing this on their news. So this was something that really sparked something in the broader public. And the questions that were swirling around were these. We had three big ones. What happened? What's going to happen next? And what should we do? And I'm going to try to step through each of those as we talk through the presentation here. I'm going to give you just a little more context on the fishery because I think it can be useful. This again is that picture of the footprint of the snow crab population in 2021 as seen by the survey. And the fishery happens down here in deeper waters on the large males. Generally, the dynamics of the stock are such that the larvae are advected farther north, and then there's an ontogenetic migration south and west as they grow older. Snow crab also have a terminal molt, which means that they will shed their shell one last time before becoming mature and then never molting again. And the size to which the females and males do that too is different. So the males are much larger. This big one on top is a male and the one on the bottom is a female. And when that female molts to maturity, the male will come pick her up and guard her while her shell is soft, and then they'll mate and go their separate ways. The fishery is also only males because of the big legs that they have. And the next question, or I guess the first question really, is what happened? And being a modeler, the first tool that I turned to was a population dynamics model or a stock assessment. And for those of you that don't do stock assessment, the basic idea is very simple. We try to understand the biomass or the abundance of a population next year, T+1, based on the biomass or abundance that we see this year, plus some additions in that year and minus the removals. So the additions could be things like births or immigration or somatic growth in the case of biomass. And the removals are things like natural deaths, which we group predation, disease, cannibalism, all of those things into that. Fishing deaths or immigration. And some of the outputs that you'll see of stock assessments are things that look like this on the right. And so this blue line is the estimate from our stock assessment of the abundance of immature animals based on the data, which are the black points with the bars representing the uncertainty in that data. And then these are the sizes down at the bottom of the immature crab and the mature crab on the right. So in reality, these models are much more complicated. Those are the equations that go into one of the assessments for snow crab that I have, and because some people are more or less interested in those, while I speak about the model structure, I'm going to put up this video of spider crab in Australia somewhere. These aren't snow crab, but it's difficult to get video like this of snow crab given the environment in which they stay. But they're closely related, and it gives you an idea of how they move and also how they molt, which is a key thing that we have to think about in doing stock assessments for crab that they don't in fish. So fish have a continuous growth. Crustaceans have a discrete growth. They molt once in the year for snow crab, and then they grow to a certain size. But a fish puts on weight over the course of the year. So the assessments that we use are size structured instead of age based. We track the numbers of crab at a given size in a given year through the years. And to do that, we have to have an idea of how much they grow in a year, or how much they grow when they molt. And that piece of machinery in our stock assessment is called a size transition matrix, and it is informed by data that partners have gone out and collected, where they go into the ocean, they trawl in an area where they've got crab that they think are going to molt. They pick up the ones that are about to molt, measure them, put them somewhere safe, and then measure them again. So we've got a pre and post molt growth increment. Okay, now the interesting stuff happens, and even if you're interested in the models, you probably won't be paying attention after this. This is the molting process of spider crab here. They literally just back out of their shell. Yeah, it's otherworldly. I'm just going to watch too, because it's quite the experience. Yeah, so these are the sorts of things that we have to pay special attention to when we are modeling the dynamics of crab in the Bering Sea and elsewhere. So one of the things that we got out of these population dynamics models was an estimate of how that natural portion of mortality that wasn't fishing varied over time. And that's this red line here. This is for immature crab on the top and for mature crab on the bottom. And I think the thing that you'll probably immediately be drawn to is this spike in 2018 or 2019 of mortality that's much higher than any of the other years. So our goal here was try to understand that spike. And to do that, we looked at the historical time series and all of the hypotheses that we could think about for why the crab may have died. Here I'm going to note that we did think about maybe they moved, maybe they died. I'm not going to talk about how we came to the conclusion that mortality was likely a large driver of this, but you can go read the paper if you like and send me questions if you got them. So there were a lot of hypotheses for why the crab may have died at that point in time. It could have been that the water was too hot and they just cooked in their shell. There could have been disease or discards in the directed fishery. They could have eaten each other. There could have been other fisheries that were impacting the stock somehow. It could have been a function of density or predation. There are a lot of different ideas floating around. And we built indices that represent each of these hypotheses, and through our analyses, temperature and mature population were the consistently significant covariates coming out of the model. So temperature and mature population had something to do with it. But just at first blush, the temperatures weren't so high that the crab could not survive. We know that from the laboratory that they can survive the temperatures they were at. And it's also a little bit trickier to understand how an increased density could result in mortality. And the key piece of information actually came from the 1980s. The figure you're looking at is from Foyle et al. They went and collected a bunch of snow crab from the wild, put them in different baths of different temperature. That sounds a little bit more luxurious than it probably actually was, but they had these different baths at different temperatures, and they tracked a bunch of things. One of them, and the key piece of information for our analysis, was the caloric requirements. So from 0 degrees here on the x-axis to 3 degrees, there was roughly a doubling of the required calories for the crab. So if we take that piece of information and then we look at the temperature of the crab we're occupying when we captured them in the survey, and this is something else that we get from the survey, our measurements of bottom temperature. And then we look at the number of crab out there. We can calculate the needed caloric requirements. And that's here in the left. So the colors just represent the different sizes of crabs needing food, but the absolute height of it represents the population level needs. And from 2017 to 2018, there was approximately a quadrupling of the requirements, and that was double the previous high back in the 90s. We look for other pieces of this puzzle to try and sort out what might be going on. And looking at the weight and size of the crab that we've collected over time was another interesting avenue to pursue. And the upshot of this analysis was that the weight and size of a 75 millimeter carapace width crab was 15% less in 2018 than 2017. So it seems like they were a bit lighter in their shell. The population was also concentrated in the smallest footprint that it has been since we've been watching the stock. So down here in the left-hand corner, the colored dots are, the colored squares are places where snow crab were observed in 2018. And then the grayed out squares are places where we have historically seen snow crab. I should give you a little sneak peek here. The Kodiak lab with Aaron Fedowa and Mike Litzo have developed a condition index starting in 2019. And that condition index indicated that in 2019, the body condition of crab was very poor compared to even just 2021 and 2022. So putting all of these pieces of this puzzle together, the conclusion that we came to was that increased metabolic demands, changes in weight and size, and decreased spatial extent suggests that starvation likely played a role in the collapse of snow crab. One question I often get when I talk about this is what else was going on in the Bering Sea during this marine heat wave in 2018 and 2019, where the bottom temperatures were very high. And they're interesting things. Tanner crab, for example, was another similar stock that generally stays out of the cold pool. Tanner crab look similar to snow crab. And from Buck Stockhausen's assessment last year, the recruitment in 2023 and 2022 that was estimated was some of the highest on record. And when you lag that back to when it settled to the bottom of the ocean, that was during the heat wave. The estimated walleye pollock recruitment in 2019 during that heat wave was also the highest on record currently. We've also seen a lot of sablefish recruitment since really the blob coming through the Gulf. There are other stocks in the area that didn't do so well. There were the salmon in the Yukon that are in big trouble. There were marine mammal and bird die-offs as well. So I guess the point that I wanted to make here is that while snow crab had and other species had very adverse reactions to the marine heat wave, it seems to have benefited some other species as well. Okay, so the next question on our list was what happens next? And once you have a model that you can link different population processes to environmental indices and environmental drivers, you can think about how those environmental drivers might change in the future, and that can tell you how you might expect the population to behave under different scenarios. And so that's our next step here. Each of these black lines represent the estimated mortality here at top for immature animals, mature mortality here, estimated recruitment, which is just the small animals coming into the population. And then this is the probability of terminally molting here in the black. And You can explain each of these population processes incorporating environmental indices like ice or the Arctic oscillation and density better than if you didn't. And that's what those colored lines show. They show different combinations of density and environmental drivers to try and explain the variation in these processes. So once you've got these links, you can, I'll talk a little bit about the links first. So for ice in this analysis was a big player in both mortality and recruitment. So these blue lines here indicate the relationship between the covariate at the top, ice here in the middle, and then whatever population process the color indicates. So for this, if there's very little ice, there's very little recruitment. If there's a lot of ice, there's a lot of recruitment. So these correlative relationships can be used to project the populations forward. Same for mortality. If there's very little ice, the mortality is high. I'm not going to go into the one down here deeply, but this is kind of a neat ecological story. You can predict the probability of terminally molting, of maturing, by the number of small mature males out there and the number of large mature males out there. And the big story here is this dark blue over here that says if there are a lot of mature males out there and you're a medium-sized male, you're going to delay molting to maturity so you can get bigger and compete with the larger males that are already out there. Okay, so if you've got these sorts of relationships, you can then project the stock forward, and that's what I've done here. So each of the processes are on the outside, maturity at top right, recruits, bottom right, natural mortality, bottom left. And then the top left is the trajectory of the mature portion of the population. The takeaway from this is that because of that strong relationship to ice, this is under a scenario where ice declines over the next 40 years. Because of the strong relationship of recruitment to ice, the recruits just gradually trend downward. And that filters through to the mature male biomass, abundance, actually. There is a short window here, no matter how you model it, of the potential for a rebound if the ice and Arctic oscillation line up, but there's also a lot of uncertainty around whether or not that could happen. Let's see. So I think I wanted to say that this is a somewhat unusual example where we found this many relationships between population processes and environmental drivers. These sorts of relationships are prone to breaking down, so there's probably more uncertainty associated with these trajectories than are represented here. But these are the sorts of things that we're trying to create as scenario-based planning, so we can test different management strategies against these sorts of trajectories in the stock. And that leads to the next question: what do we do? I wanted to start this part just by saying that fisheries management has been unreasonably effective over the last couple of decades of controlling fishing mortality. And one of my favorite papers of the last several years is this paper by Ray Hilborn that looks at the RAM Legacy Stock Assessment Database. It's got almost 900 stocks from around the globe. And this figure shows the unreasonable efficacy of fisheries management globally. This green line here is the exploitation rate relative to a target. So if the green line is above the gray line here, above 1, that means that overfishing is occurring. And this bend in the 1990s is really when fisheries management kicked in globally, and this boomerang of the exploitation rates is a testament to the effort that has been put in around the globe by fishery scientists and government officials and managers and stakeholders to be invested in this process. From these analyses, we also know that management targets and rebuilding plans, which are central pieces of our management in Alaska are one of the good predictors of good fisheries management. And that was by a paper by Mike Melnichuk that came out right after this analysis, but also based on the RAM Legacy database. So in that context, wanting to say that fisheries management has done a good job over the last several decades, I'm going to throw a wrench into that process, and that wrench is climate change. One of the questions that we got, even though we know that our management targets are important to good management, was whether or not we should change those as we see the environment changing. And our national standards actually direct us to do this. Our targets are meant to reflect the current and projected environmental conditions. So to think through this a bit, I've got a toy example here of a stock. And we're looking at it in biomass and harvest rate space. So biomass on the x-axis, harvest rate on the y. This gray line represents the stock. When it's unfished, it sits at 1,000 units of biomass, and as you increase the harvest rate, it declines. This dashed line represents that sloped harvest control rule that we talked about earlier. That was one of the key pieces of key tools in our fisheries management arsenal. And the point A here is our biomass at maximum sustainable yield. That's our target. And then beneath that target, our harvest rates will decline. So if a fisheries manager runs into a situation where the environment changes and they have to make a decision on whether or not they should change their targets, it might look something like this. So if the carrying capacity drops to 500, that would imply a decline in the target biomass, and then your harvest control rule shape would also look like this. What that means is that if the stock was at, say, 400 here, and you're using your old rule, your old target, you would keep your harvest rate high, or you would keep your harvest rate would come down to here. But if you use the new target, it would remain high. I'll try and explain that just a little bit better here. You can run through the thought experiment of what would happen if a manager changed their targets from A to B by projecting this forward under those different decisions, and seeing what the biomass left in the ocean, the harvest that they get or the catch they get, and the rates that they have to apply to the population to get that harvest. It can tell us something about that decision. First, if you change your targets to match the environmental conditions, the biomass in the water will be much lower than if it didn't. That's the top panel. The harvest you get is very similar. You get a little bit more if you change, but in the grand scheme, they're relatively similar. But the harvest rates you apply if you change are much higher than they would be if you don't change. And I think that this thought exercise is perhaps underappreciated. And I'll repeat again that because I think it's a counterintuitive result that if we adjust our management targets to reflect decreased productivity, we're going to place higher exploitation rates on populations under stress. And I think that just from a priori perspective is not what you would expect from managers of natural resources. So that was a very simple model that I showed. I just want to say that we did it with a more complicated model, snow crab. If you look to the harvest rate here, you get the same sort of thing. The blue line is where you change. The green line is where you keep your historical targets. Under that, the yield is also very similar. If you'd like to read that paper, it's linked here somewhere. We also looked at changes in other processes than recruitment, like growth and M. And under our current system, changing will exacerbate the problem that I just described, as it not only moves this kink in the control rule to a lower biomass, but it increases the fishing mortalities. And the papers go into why all of that happens. I'm not going to talk about it right now. Okay, I'm getting close to time, so I'm going to try to summarize all of that and then leave you with a couple of closing thoughts. The the effort that goes into managing crab populations in the Bering Sea is big. We've got huge survey teams, we have the council, we've got our plan teams. There are a lot of people working on these problems, and even these intensely managed populations with great data can collapse. And I think that's an important lesson to think about. At the same time, these massive environmental change that we're seeing through the marine heat waves and the gradual trends in ice and temperature can have complex impacts. There are going to be winners and losers, like I showed you before. Snow crab had very negative responses to the marine heat wave, but pollock and tanner crab seem to have more positive responses. When we try to incorporate the environmental change into our current models and our current management frameworks, this can have some counterintuitive outcomes. So this is a space that I think that spending some time thinking as a larger entity throughout NOAA is going to be useful. And I do want to emphasize that fisheries management has been a great success over the last several decades at controlling exploitation rates in many parts of the world. But climate change is a novel issue that our current systems that think about the world in equilibrium are going to have a difficult time facing. So these are my closing thoughts. This should be quick. I think it's been tricky thinking about what sorts of targets we should have for stocks that are changing through time. And I think I'm coming to a more solid opinion that changing your reference points is not a great idea. If you change your reference point, you'll just gradually chase your stock into the ground. And I don't feel like that's a great idea. If I was coming at this anew and naive, I would think that we would want to fish the stocks that are going to flourish under climate change harder and allow the species that are under stress time to adapt. So thinking about ways to make that happen, I think, will be useful time spent. And one of the ways that we could help that process is looking for ways to relieve stress on the populations for which we actually have management levers. And by that, I mean, when we came to the result that we thought that the driver of the snow crab collapse was a marine heat wave, it was nice to have an answer, but it was also hard because it was an answer that we didn't have a lever for in management. We couldn't push a button and get more ice on the Bering Sea. So it was somewhat frustrating. And I guess ultimately, even if I have this model that I just shared that links all of these processes to environmental drivers and density dependence, and I can project it forward and get some prediction for what the future is going to be, even if that was a perfect predictor of the future, if I have no lever to change that future, I'm left wondering what to do. And I think, so part of this is, part of trying to look for management levers needs to be built around explicitly identifying trade-offs. And the trade-offs that I'm particularly speaking about are things like the efficacy of protected areas or the gear restrictions that we have, or focused research on bycatch effects. One of the big things that's talked about in crab world a lot is how the other fisheries for things like pollock or cod are affecting the crab stocks. And while we have observations of bycatch that comes up in the nets over time, there's also likely unobserved bycatch. So the net goes along the bottom and bonks a crab on the head, but it doesn't go in the net, and that crab is no longer. So I think focusing our, or at least a portion of our research around trying to understand these other potential effects would be useful. And finally, I think the thing that has come out of this whole ordeal is the need for flexibility in the fishing communities. One of the hardest things to watch throughout this process has been the crabbers not having any crab to fish. And part of this is that the quota system has been set up in a way that it can be difficult to change fisheries. And these crabbers are mostly invested in the crab fisheries. So when the crab go away, they can't fish the other things that may or may not be flourishing in the system. So thinking about ways to equitably manage the resources that flourish and flounder is going to be a useful and fruitful topic of research going forward. I think given that we're about 10 minutes out, I'm going to stop there and just say thanks to a lot of people in the ocean there. There are many I missed, I'm sure. This is a picture in Duck Harbor I took before going out on the survey. If you haven't done anything like that and you have interest in doing something like that, you should reach out to somebody that can get you out there, because it's a great experience, and it's collecting vital data for these sorts of analyses. So thank you all for listening. And if you have questions afterwards that you don't want to chat, you can reach me at this email address. All right.
Cody, thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation. I am going to move us on to our Q&A section. The first question we have here says, if recruitment is impacted by changes in the ice, it seems that the population growth rate would decline and harvest rate should decrease.
Yeah, that is right. And I think that was one of the central messages of the paper that I attempted to describe in where we should set our management targets. If we think that changing our management targets to reflect the new conditions of no ice is the route to go, this wouldn't happen. The harvest rates would be higher than if we didn't. So I think keeping in mind these sorts of a priori expectations about what management should be doing is a good thing to do as we think through how to face these problems.
Great, thank you. All right, then we have one more question here. And this question says, what is the difference in negative impacts between surveys and trawl fishing? Is that measured?
Ooh, that's a good question. I guess the spatial footprint of a trawl survey is vastly smaller than the spatial footprint of the trawl fleets. For snow crab, there's actually been some interesting studies done recently on essential fish habitat, and what do they call it? The fishing impact. Shoot, I'm forgetting the acronym, but basically they've created maps that look at how much of the seafloor is impacted by different sorts of fishing methodology. And if you're interested in those, you can go to one of the rebuilding plans for snow crab. There are some neat maps in there that quantify that. But let's see, the spatial footprint of the trawl survey, we go out at 435 locations in tow for half an hour with a net that is, maybe 100 yards across. So that is relatively small, but from these samples, given the number of them, we've got over 400 of them, we can build a relatively good index of abundance for a large number of species. So if you want to see the impact of different fishing gears, you should hunt down the rebuilding plan for snow crab, and that will give you an entry to the different sorts of maps that we've got for the impacts of different fisheries on different species.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we have a bunch of questions coming in, so we're going to try to get through them as quickly as we can. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions, to make sure to put those in the Q&A panel that's on the right side of your screen. All right, next question, Cody, that we have says, there's a lot of backlash right now regarding trawl fishing and bycatch. Are there any plans of closing crab areas to midwater trawls as well, as they often fish bottom?
You are right. This is a very contentious topic right now, and there's a lot of council effort spent looking at different plans. As far as I know right now, there are no plans to do this, but it's something that is talked about, and plans are being put forward to be considered at least. Each year, if you're interested in hearing more about this, I would go to the North Pacific Fisheries Marine Management Council website, npfmc.org, and they've got documents that include the discussion of the council and how things were left recently. That's a great resource to pursue this further.
Great, thank you. All right. Next question says, do salmon, for example, Bristol Bay sockeye, have any ecological interaction with snow crab?
This is a fun one, and I wish Aaron was here to talk a bit more about it. So the salmon likely eat the larvae of crab as they're in their pelagic phase. So crab, I showed you the picture of the male and the female in the mating embrace. At some point in time after that happens, larvae are released into the water column. They float for a few months, and then they settle back onto the seafloor. So during that time, we know that salmon will sometimes eat the larvae. I think it's important to note that the mortality event that we saw here would not be related to that at all, because we were observing crab that were 55 millimeters carapace width on the seafloor that had been growing for 5 years that salmon would not interact with at all. But this is, we have ecosystem, let's see, ESPs and ESRs, ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles that try to link and list all of the things that we think may be interrelated to crab dynamics. And salmon are one of the things when listed when we're thinking about the larval dynamics.
All right, thank you. The next question says, what do you do with the catch from a survey?
Most of it goes back into the ocean. Some of it goes back alive, and some of it we need to take things like otoliths or stomach samples, or the process of sexing them can be invasive sometimes. So that goes back into the ocean to feed other things on the seafloor.
Perfect.
Oh, and some of it, I should also say that some of it comes home to our laboratories too. So when I was out there, we were collecting small snow crab to bring back into the lab to run long-term experiments on, to try and understand how things like ocean acidification or warming temperatures can impact their ability to form shells or to grow in general. So some of it does come back to the lab as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Cody. We only have a few more minutes, and we do have some questions coming in. So let me get this one up here. This says, given such a huge pulse in a natural mortality event, what would that imply about how long-term natural mortality should be applied for reference points?
Oh, gosh, this is a very hard question. And if this is a Jim, I think it is, I'll come find you later. And thank you for such a hard question. But so natural mortality is a key parameter in our models. It really influences the dynamics of the population, and what our reference points look like. I think one of the things that I've really struggled with trying to think both about how to model population dynamics and what our targets should be is that historically we were in a framework where we could use the past to try and understand what the future should be like. And that sort of equilibrium system was very convenient for these sorts of calculations. And moving to a scenario in which the future will not be similar to the past makes things so much harder. I guess we're kind of pursuing two different options here. One is to try and include covariates into our projections to understand the potential range of what those targets could be. And the other is to not even think about that and try to maintain our status quo targets, and which are often more conservative than they would be if you tried to incorporate that sort of mortality event or an increased likelihood of those sorts of mortality events into the future. So honestly, it's a hard question that I don't have a great answer for right now, and I'm hoping that all of the big brains out there are going to help us think through this question going forward.